Greetings friends and welcome to the gameplay guide on how to make a turret or a tower that will automatically seek out enemies when they draw near, fire upon them, and then return to its resting position when the enemy is no longer in range. So, first thing we're going to do is just make like the world's most stupid looking, super basic tower slash turret. I'm just going to give it a nice little barrel here, make it kind of long. Yeah, and then I'm just gonna put it on like a kind of a circle. So this is super basic, doesn't have to be fancy. This is really us just figuring out what's cracking. So here we have our super basic vibe here. This is our little chap. The first thing we're going to do for our tower is to give it a good old-fashioned microchip. Microchips are absolutely essential, of course, when it comes to just adding all your logic and your bits and pieces. So let's go into here, and the first thing we're going to add onto it is a look-at rotator. Then let's go into the tweak menu of this look-at rotator, and let us configure the direction that forward is, essentially the direction that it's going to be looking in. We're going to have it nice and forward. You can use a grid snap to make it very accurate if you like, but yeah, that depends on you. And you can, with the strength and the dampening, we're going to mess with that stuff when we get a bit further along. So I've got my nice turret here. I think the few tweaks I'm going to make is that I'm going to go into its labels and make it a machine. You can make it a weapon, you can make it a friend, really what works for you. Then we're going to make ourselves a nice enemy, or just get one. We're going to just get a blank puppet, basic chap, go into their puppet logic, and I'm going to put a tag in them that's going to make them a, just going to make them baddie. They are the baddies here. And not only that, but I'm going to go to their labels and make them foe. So what's the difference between a label and a tag? Labels are good for differentiating friends from enemies in terms of dealing damage and force and that sort of thing. Tags are useful for looking at and finding targets and that sort of a thing. So you use, for the look at rotator, let's go back into our turret. Look at rotator is going to look for tag, baddie, and then when it deals damage, it's going to deal damage to foes. Hope that makes sense. Alrighty, then we've got a look at rotator. We can have stay upright, so that way it's just going to sort of be moving like left and right rather than up and down as well. But that depends. If you've got a tower defense where it's kind of at a different level, then yeah, mess around with that as you will. Alrighty, so let's see what happens if I go into play mode. And we've got this dude. Ah, the turret is following him. Ah, run for your life. So there you are. There is a very simple way to track. You've just got to look at rotator, which is nice and easy. Alrighty. If you don't have the stay upright on, then let's have a look to see what happens here. Then it can go up as well. So it really depends. You can really work with either. It all depends on you, friends. Alrighty. So the next thing we're going to do is make the tower only look at you when you're within a certain range. So we're going to do this by sticking down we're going to go into sensors and input and put down a trigger zone. And the trigger zone is going to, let's just scope into that. We're going to have things to detect. And we're going to go baddie. Then we're going to move the little bauble, because it's going to be kind of close to the microchip, which isn't very central to our tower at the minute. But we're going to put it fairly central in the tower itself. Doesn't have to be perfect. Then we're going to increase that size. And this will be the range that activates the look at rotator. So let's have a quick test. It's following me, but if I get further away, it doesn't care what I'm doing because I'm not in its kill zone. So what we have here is something that is going to look at us when we get in range, and then when it has a target acquired, it is going to start shooting at us. So let's get that shooting goodness working. So we're going to go found target, the little tick there, and that's going to activate the emitter. And what is the emitter going to emit, you ask? Well, that's a good question. We should make something quickly. So let's go into sculpt mode and just make a nice little projectile here. Now, very important, press R2 to select your projectile, go over your cannon tower, press L1 and X to scope in, then let go of R2, then press L1 and circle to get out. So what happens is this makes it part of the group that is the cannon tower. So the reason we do this is because you can now save this, and when you put it in like another game or whatever, when you say this is a new creation, you can plop it down. All these bells and whistles will be invisible. But if you copy this without the cannonball, and the cannonball is a separate entity, then your emitter is going to try and emit something that isn't there. So there's just a little tip for you. Alrighty, so the emitter is going to emit this little cannonball. We need to scope in, otherwise, why is it important to scope in now? Because if you don't, you're going to be shooting a whole cannon at, a whole like cannon tower at them. So there you are. We put that in a fairly central position, kind of that sort of a vibe. That's fairly good, I should hope. Increase the angle a little bit, and you really mess around with that. Make the emit speed fairly high. You can make it something like 15. And as for the time between emits, that's how long it takes to fire each shot. So every 0.5 seconds it's going to shoot. Then for these things, you can make max emitted, you can set that to infinite, but you might want to say object lifetime and make that only a second. So after a second, the projectile will disappear. Otherwise, you'll have a whole pile of them just collecting in your game. So let's see if this works. Pew pew pew! Oh no, it's shooting at me! Ah! So that's cool. You see, I'm out of its range. It doesn't care about me anymore, and now I'm back. Ah, pew 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 pew. It's not the most accurate of towers, but yeah, once again, you can kind of just tweak those things as you see fit. One of the things to do is also just mess around with the damping and stuff. So, for example, if you've got your damping set at, if you've got your damping at 100, I'm just going to show you what happens. Let's have our damping at, oh sorry, if we have our damping at 50 and our strength at 100, let's see what happens. The tower is kind of this freakish, it's a little bit jittery and it has this shakiness to it. So now, but it'll follow whatever it's looking at very accurately, but it'll give it a bit of a jitteriness. If we lower that a bit and we make damping, not 100, but let's make damping 90%, that will slow it down and make it a little bit more smooth. You see that? So there we are, it's got a bit of more smooth movement. But at the same time, it's a little bit slower as well. So just bear that in mind, tweak with that, and mess with that as you see fit. So there we are, friends. That's something. We have now a tower that can look at you and shoot at you. If you want to make your cannonball a little bit more interesting, then what you'll want to do is, also a good tip is to have preview invisibility, have this unticked, so that you can see something that is being emitted, because when things are emitted, they become invisible. Let's go into our cannonball. We can start messing around with that, and pretty much, I'm not going to do too much here, but let's have a quick squiz. You can do things in here like add a, let's say, a damage modifier or a health modifier that can do, let's say, like whatever, minus 50 health, and it'll do it in like a particular zone. So this will be the area that the cannonball does damage, and it can be sort of in a fairly large area. Or you can do it on impact, so only if you get hit will you lose health. But yeah, that's going to make it deal some damage. Some other things you might want to have is to like add an explosion. If you want to add an explosion, it's quite simple. You can just use some of the preset explosions that Medium Molecule has made. So we can go into search, go to the Dreamiverse, Medium Molecule Quick Start, Effects, and we can have a nice explosion. You can just put that wherever, that default one there that we're just going to stick down. Then you'll actually add another emitter inside your cannonball itself. make a nice emitter, go into your emitter, set the emit speed to 0 so that what appears just stays wherever it is, wherever it appears. Set the max emitter to 0, or infinite rather. You're going to choose the explosion to be the thing that is emitted. Then you're going to move it to where your cannonball is. So in other words, where it appears. So that's going to explode. You make it kind of central to where the cannonball is. Then you're going to make its emitted object lifetime. You can make that maybe just 0.3 seconds, so it's kind of a brief explosion. And you can make that time 0. It doesn't matter because it's only going to be emitting once. So those are your tweaks for the explosion emitter. When is it going to explode though? Well, it's going to explode when, let's go to sensors and input. It's going to explode when it impacts with something, right? So let's go bumps and then activate the emitter. Let's see if this thing is going to work now. Boom, boom. Oh wow, 2 hits and I'm dead. Wow, this thing is kicking my ass. Oh damn. Okay, my tower is quite powerful. Pew, 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 pew. But there we are, friends. You've got a very basic tower, and it's currently kicking my ass, and it has destroyed me. Alrighty, friends. If that is good enough for you, that is good enough for me. And I might do some extra bells and whistles for towers later on. There are quite a few other things you can add, but I think that is the gist of a tower. That is the essential building blocks, and they are the trigger zone, which is where your tower starts to see people. Then when it is in the trigger zone, it's max range, in other words, it's going to start looking at the baddies, you know, the enemies, the foes, and then it is going to start emitting or shooting its weapon, you know, its projectile. The projectile itself, you can put a microchip in there. Make sure to make them part of the same group. Go into that microchip, you'll have something that deals damage, and then you can have an impact sensor so that when the projectile hits something, it's going to emit an explosion. And friends, you can be adding sound effects to these things. You can be doing all sorts. It's really up to you. I leave it up to your creative side, and I hope that this was helpful and useful for you. And right now, I'm going to try and escape. Oh! Catch you on the flip-flop. Whoa!